Hello, everybody. Gabe here, and I'm back in the middle of winter. Uh, the footage you're watching is not me riding my motorcycle right now, for it is the beginning of February, and there are feet of snow everywhere. No, this is footage from my Gaspésie trip from the summer. I never ended up making a video, as I explained, but some of the footage is still cool, so I thought this is a pretty good use for it. It's more interesting than the inside of my garage with the bad lighting or anything like that. I thought about making a Honda Civic vlog. Maybe I still will, just out of boredom. But I'm too busy during the day and driving around in the dark at night, and it gets dark still very early, isn't very exciting. So instead of a Honda Civic vlog, I'll just use some old footage and do a voiceover instead. I think that's the simplest. So I'm on a computer headset instead of my normal microphone, which actually turns out not to work very well outside of my helmet. So hopefully the sound won't be too bad. It'll be clear enough. Um, so a couple of topics. I thought I'd start out with, well, I was wrong about a couple of things in my last video. So I talked about the teaser that Yamaha Europe put out for the XSR 900, the 2022 update. So in November, they put out that teaser video. But since then, they've put out the bike on their website, lots of pictures, more information. There's other videos on it. So I thought I was checking it out, and I realized I said a couple things in my video about it that were wrong, and those two things I thought I'd address them. The first is that I thought the bar and mirrors that were shown would be an extra. They wouldn't come with the bike. You'd have to buy them kind of separately from Yamaha and add them on. But no, those are just the mirrors that come with that bike. So there you go. I know bar and mirrors are very popular with people who like XSRs. So good for you guys. That's awesome. I mentioned I'm not really a big fan of them. I don't like making the bike wider, but that's okay. My bike doesn't have them, so I guess everybody wins there. But yeah, I was wrong. I thought they wouldn't be stock, and they are. The other thing, in a similar vein, is the seat. Um, in the teaser trailer, there's like a guy who's like a former Yamaha racer, and they show him looking in his garage at his race bike, and like kind of reliving the memories in his head of racing and being on the podium, and then they kind of flash the screen, little effects, and like the old bike becomes the new XSR, and it's the same colors and stuff. Well, his race bike has a cowl over where the back seat would be because it's a race bike and you're not taking passengers with you during a race. And that cowl is blue and yellow like the rest of the bike. It's made of presumably metal or plastic. Um, and I guess I got that confused because when they show the current bike, it's all black and it's just the seat. And you can see it very clearly if you go to the Yamaha website. So what they've done, and I think this is very clever actually, is they've made a normal two-person seat, but they've shaped the passenger portion, the back portion of the seat, to look like a cowl on an old style race bike, that kind of squared off shape. So it looks like a single seater. It looks like it's got a cowl. It has that race bike look, but you don't lose any of the functionality. You can still stick a passenger on there, no problem. So I think that's pretty cool compromise and pretty smart of them to do. Again, I'm not in love with that look. I find it's a little blocky, a little tall, but like it is very popular, and a lot of people kind of modify their bike, whether with the official Yamaha seat cowl or some aftermarket solution. They would already modify their XSR to achieve that look. So now it just kind of comes stock. So I think for the people that are into that, that works out pretty well. So there you go. I was wrong about those two things about the XSR. Some other things I noticed about it. I knew the look would be polarizing when I saw it because bike looks are almost always polarizing. But I find it interesting that in a couple of comments on my old video, you really see both ends of the spectrum there. You have one guy who commented that he didn't like the new look, and to the point where he went out and panic bought a leftover 2021 model because he didn't want to get stuck with the new one. He wanted to buy one, but so he hurried up and did it before the old look wasn't available anymore. But somebody else commented that they thought the new bike had an overall more cohesive design that fit better together. So that's definitely something that's kind of subjective, but I find it's very interesting how different people see that differently. For my part, I even after having looked at the new one a lot more on the website, not just my kind of initial impressions, I still prefer the first gen version of the XSR, But I've definitely, there's some angles I like the new one at a lot. I still would like to see it in person, but because Quebec got hit with pretty badly with the Omicron wave, there's basically no chance that there's going to be a bike show in February, because well, in February, it is February, so in 2 weeks from now about is when it was supposed to be. um, there's no way they're going to allow such a large indoor gathering at this time, and I don't think the bike show is going to get rescheduled anyway. There's no news about that yet, so it looks like I'll have to wait for a dealer to have one, and if it's anything like some other popular models of bikes, I'm not going to get to see one for a while. um, because yeah, this week I went to see a bike dealer, quite one of the biggest ones in the area, maybe one of the biggest ones in the province even, and they had nothing in stock. And I mean, it's winter; they always have less stock in the winter. They're not receiving new stuff for probably another month. But I've been in the winter before, before the pandemic and all this supply chain nonsense that's going on. I've been to the dealer, in January or February in the past, and it wasn't as bad as this. I mean, yes, they have some snowmobiles and stuff like that, and it's normal stuff, but I mean, this was definitely something else. The low inventory, and I don't mean like, oh, super popular bikes like the Yamaha T7 where you just can't see one, or the Triumph Trident. I've never seen those bikes in person. They sell out. They never even get to the showroom. They go from the crate directly to the purchaser because there's like a waiting list for them. But so I'm not talking necessarily just about bikes like that. I still expect those. You still can't see a KTM 890 Adventure. You still can't see, I said, Triumph Trident, Yamaha T7. Um, Kind of weirdly, the Kawasaki KLX 300 is apparently very popular. The new dual sport, or the update to the old KLX that came out, which I'm going to come back to. It's kind of the meat of this video. But yeah, they had very little in stock, and I mean, I couldn't see a Ninja 650. Not that I was looking for one. I just noticed I didn't have one. No MT-07. That's another bike that they always have in stock. They had an MT-09. They had an MT-03, but no MT-07. What else were they missing? It's some basic stuff. Like, I'm trying to think. Oh, no DRZ 400, except for well, they had the supermodel, a supermoto, but no DRZ S. They were missing one of the Gixxers. Anyway, um, you get the idea. But the place was pretty barren, and it was, yeah. Apparently, it's because there's a lot of difficulty with supply chain still. You hear that everywhere, so it's not entirely surprising. But I can say it wasn't this bad last summer. So already, they sold off a bunch of stock last year, and they're just not getting more, it seems. So yeah, the reason I went to have a look is because let's go back a little to my first video where I mentioned that I was getting rid of my KTM 790 Adventure, and the reason I was doing that was because it didn't work for me as an off-road bike, and one of the reasons I bought it in the first place was to replace, on one hand, a sport bike, a CBR 600RR for on-road riding, but on the other hand, to replace um, my DRZ 400S that I had, my 2006. That was my like kind of off-road and like kind of adventure touring bike, and I wanted to replace that with an adventure touring bike that could also replace my sport bike, but it made it too big and too heavy for me personally to be able to confidently ride off-road on anything past a gravel road. So, as anybody watching this channel knows, I sold it and bought an XSR 900 to replace it. So now I have a sport bike, or well, a sporty bike, again, a street bike. Um, what I don't have is a dirt bike, anything to ride off the road with. I'm not going to try to scramblerize my XSR. Anyway, it's maybe light for a street bike, but it's still pretty heavy if you take it off road. It doesn't fix any of the problems. It's quite expensive to drop in the dirt. It's not made for that. So I'm not going to do that. I always figured I would eventually get another dual sport. So I started thinking about that again. And I don't know that I'm going to get one anytime soon for all sorts of reasons. One of them being maybe that they're just not that available right now. Like I said, no KLX 300, no DRZ 400 when I went to the dealer. Not a good sign. So I don't know what that's going to look like in a few months. I don't know. There's also the financial question of, the money side, depending on what I want to get. There's the problem that for a bike like that, I would want to do a lot of aftermarket modifications before I really took it on any kind of trip or anything like that. And those parts are also like long back ordered and complicated to get now. So all that said, I'm not promising any dual sport content anytime soon on this channel. I'm just saying that I am starting to think about dual sports. But my starting point was that DRZ 400. So when I start to think about dual sports, I start by thinking about my old DRZ, which I love that bike. Um, I did a lot of mods to it, and the most important ones were gas tank, a bigger gas tank, a seat concept seat, some protection like radiator guards, metal skid plate, UFO bark busters with like the wraparound guards. I had those double take enduro mirrors that are like unbreakable, and they're on ram mount balls, so they move out of the way, which is pretty handy. Um, I probably did a bunch of other stuff I'm not thinking about. I had some USB charging capability. I had a little windscreen on there. I think that's the core of it. I mean, if I did basic maintenance and wear items like chains, sprocket, tires, stuff like that. But I'm talking about actual modifications. I think that covers the core of it. Um, and I really liked the bike, and I kind of regretted selling it, but I couldn't really have two bikes at the time, and I really wish I'd kept it now because the used DRZs like that have gone. They've basically doubled in price. So if I had held on to it now, it'd be worth twice what I sold it for, which is unfortunate. But what are you gonna? You can't predict there's going to be a pandemic, so um, I can't anyway. So that's my starting point. I said, well, I could get another DRZ, and the kind of finale to my thought process here is I probably will get another DRZ because from a lot of perspectives, it still to me makes a lot of sense. But I thought about some other stuff, so I kind of run down some of the other things I thought about and why I am more or less interested in those options. So we'll start with the things that are bigger than the DRZ. So your KLR 650 and your DR 650 type bikes, the bigger 650s. Um, they're very heavy and they're quite bulky, especially the KLR. It's a wide, big bike. It weighs almost as much as the KTM. So on that point alone, it's out. It's basically a worse version of the KTM to me. I know people love KLRs. I'm sorry. I'm not trashing your favorite bike, but it's not for me, especially off-road. On-road, it would be fine, but that's not what I'm looking for here. I'm looking for something that's got that trail focus. So it's too much. My top end for weight is basically what a DRZ weighs. That's the heaviest I'm looking for, and ideally would be lighter. And KLR is way heavier than that. The DR650 is a little heavier. I've ridden one before. It doesn't feel too bad. It has weird ergonomics for an off-road bike, but you could fix that with aftermarket bars and risers and foot pegs and stuff. So it's not the end of the world. But my problem with the 650 is it's cheaper because it has worse suspension and it has no water cooling, so the performance isn't really better than the 400. And in Quebec, a DRZ 400 is an interesting bike because it's actually like 390 something cc's, and that makes the plate less expensive because it's under 400 cc's. Whereas when you go over that, your plate gets more expensive every year, your registration. So for a bike to be over 400 and make this list, it had better be damn good. And the DR650 with its Iron Age technology is not that. I don't hate it or anything, and they are plentifully available and inexpensive, but for trail focus, it's heavy and not that performant, and not the suspension isn't great. So I would rather the DRZ rather than the DR. The other 650 style bike is the KTM 690 Enduro R or the Husqvarna 701 Enduro. I don't fit on the Husqvarna. It's much too tall. I tried to sit on it. I couldn't even get my toes down. It was so tall. That's ridiculous. Like I said in previous videos, I'm 5'8 or 5'9, 31-inch inseam. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm in that ballpark. That Husqvarna is like it's so tall. It's so crazy tall. If you're under 6 foot, I wouldn't look at that bike personally. So that's, you try it for yourself, of course. But now the KTM version is shorter. It's not as bad. I don't like the design as much, but it's not so important. But it's a complex bike. It's got electronics. It's got a lot of history of fuel pump problems. There's this riding with Tom video where he gets stranded in the middle of a desert in Australia because his KTM blows up, and I watched that video a couple of years ago, and I've never forgotten it. And I know that's like very anecdotal and not great, but like I still think, man, I wouldn't want that to happen to me, especially because I tend to go alone. That story ends with a helicopter coming to get him, by the way. So yeah, that's not what I'm looking for. Also, like kind of expensive. I don't really trust the used market on that one either because they don't turn up often, and when they do, they look kind of thrashed. So, and I don't know about how modifying it, like to add more gas, how easy that's going to be on a bike like that, because there's the subframe and all that's not exactly meant to haul tons of stuff. That said, people do round the world style 690 Enduro R builds, so I know you can do it. I know it's possible. So that's the big bikes. They're all pretty much out. On the other, flip a coin, and we get to the small bikes, the 250 type bikes. So you've got your or they're 300s now. So you've got your Honda CRF 300 and you've got your KLX 300 I mentioned before. So I couldn't even look at a KLX 300. They didn't have one in stock. I wanted to check it out. Um, I find those bikes are a little underpowered. I have ridden the predecessor to the 300, the CRF 300L, the 250L. My friend had one. It is very low to the ground, very confidence inspiring, but it is also heavy and slow. Now I understand that they've made more power and they've cut the weight on the new bike to a respectable amount. I think it weighs about 300 pounds now. That's a lot better than the old one, which weighed more or the same as a DRZ for less than half of the power. The new one is more like half of the power, but it's still pretty underpowered. If you try to take something like that on the highways, it's going to be miserable. And I did indeed watch a couple of people take their KLX 300 on the highway, and yes, they top out at 130 kilometers an hour, about 82 miles an hour there, 83 miles an hour. But that's really pinned all the way. It takes forever to get there. You have no passing power on the freeway. People cruise here at like 75, 70, 75. So at that point, I mean, you're either dangerously slow and getting passed by trucks, or you're just keeping up and you have nothing left. And I don't really like that scenario. Not that I want to spend long time on the highway, but having the capability is important. So I find those bikes are a little underpowered. Also, the Honda has like this like weird frame situation going on where it seems really sketchy to put any weight like luggage on the back, and there's a couple of pictures of people with snapped KLX 300 subframes out there too. Although I think I do trust that one better than the Honda. So those bikes are kind of out. They are quite affordable. They're actually new. They're cheaper than a new DRZ is, which is something to say. But they're not cheaper enough. I mean, I'd just rather pay the extra and get the DRZ if I couldn't find a used one. Could at least get a new one. So to me, the DRZ is still beating those bikes. There's the ultralight KTM's, the EXCF 350 and the 400. The 500. Of the two, I like the 350 better because if you're gonna go, it's probably it makes enough juice to keep up with the DRZ for sure, but it's much lighter. So I think that's the one I would go with. But that's very trail focused. Maybe it's to me that's street legal enduro. That's not something you're going to want to ride a long time on the street. It's really just to connect a couple trails together. You're not going to strap luggage to it, take it camping, and well, so I say that some people probably are doing that, and that's cool. But for me, it doesn't seem to be a good fit for my use. I'm thinking backcountry discovery route, but probably solo. So I want a bike that's light and simple enough that I could be confident to do a route like that solo, but it still has to be able to do a very long distance. The ones I'm looking at the MABDR and the NEBDR, and we're talking like 1,600 kilometers, 2,000 kilometers, like on an FE350 or sorry, the EXCF 350. FE350 is the Husqvarna version. I don't know how well that would go. They also have quite aggressive maintenance schedules. Although speaking of that, the last bike I'm considering is the Honda CRF 450 RL. They changed it. It used to be the L. Now it's the RL. Same bike. Um, that bike also has quite an aggressive maintenance schedule, but not as aggressive. And every video I've seen about it, everything I've seen about it says you can probably get away with stretching those oil changes out further. Every time somebody does a valve check on it, they find the valves are still in spec, especially if you're going to be doing some non-hardcore enduro miles on it. It's probably pretty safe to stretch it a little, and the maintenance procedures themselves don't seem so bad. So the maintenance aspect of it isn't a total turn off, although sure, I would love if the intervals were much longer, of course. Um, Performance is good. The weight is great. It's 289 pounds wet. It makes a little bit more power than a DRZ, and it beats it by 30 something pounds. It actually has a beefed up rear subframe, so you could confidently put luggage on it. Um, the fuel tank is tiny, and it's sad because it's this like super beautiful titanium fuel tank, but you'd immediately replace it with a crappy plastic one because you need more gas. That's unfortunate. I always thought. But other than the fuel tank and the maintenance aspect, I mean, from a riding point of view, it looks really, really good. It's maybe not as aggressively trail focused as the KTM options, but it's much less of a street bike than, say, a KLX or a DRZ or something. So it is kind of the Goldilocks. But yeah, it has some problems. It's expensive. Used ones are very few and far between. I've seen one. Um, I've only seen one for sale used, and it wasn't that much of a discount over a new one either. And the new ones are quite pricey. The other thing is I thought it would be too tall for me, kind of like back to the Husqvarna situation where like it'd just be too tall. But they did actually amazingly have that in stock when I went to check out the dealer, and I did fit on it, especially if you consider that you could put a lowering seat on it. I think it would be pretty comparable to a DRZ for me, so that could work. But yeah, it's quite an expensive bike, especially when you compare it to a DRZ. It is a lot lighter, a lot more trail focused. I do find it interesting, but then it has that maintenance too. You pretty much like the consensus in the community is you pretty much need to do the Vortex ECU mod to make it run smoothly and properly. So that's another added expense that, like a DRZ wouldn't need. You just cut a hole in the airbox in the DRZ, and that's your equivalent mod. There you go, you're done. Um, so I mean, it's more high tech, it's more modern. I think it's a really cool bike. I would like to get it to try it in a sense, but on the other sense, I started this whole thing by saying I'd probably just get another DRZ because it's the sensible thing to do, and I probably will just get another DRZ. But like watch this space. You never know what'll happen over the course of the summer. Maybe it'll be something else. But those are my top two anyway. The DRZ is still first place at the moment, and the CRF is behind it. I would check out a WR250R, but they're discontinued new. I've only ever seen a used one for sale once, so either they didn't sell a lot of them here, or their owners are aggressively holding on to them. Um, but I did see from the specs that the seat height is quite tall, taller than that CRF anyway. Um, I don't know though how that would actually work without actually sitting on it. But people really like those WRs. They're about as powerful as DRZs. They're lighter, they're modern, fuel injected, all that. So 6 speeds. So that could be an interesting option, assuming I actually fit on one and I find one. But yeah, like I said, I've seen like one or two used ever. So they're weirdly rare here. Also, it's not a good time to buy a used bike. The market is not. It's a great time to sell a bike, but not to buy a used one. So, yeah. So that's where I'm at. I'm thinking about dual sports. I'm thinking about BDR style rides in the future. I'm uh, I'm in that mindset. Maybe that's because I'm going a little cabin crazy, stir crazy from being inside all the time, and also like having to work from home again. That Omicron wave that's caused the bike show to be canceled has also caused all non-essential, like all people that can work remotely must work remotely. So I'm back to working remotely since mid-December, and now it's February, so I've been in my house a lot. I mean, I've gone out for errands and things like that, but I haven't really like interacted with people. Worked at the office, so I'm going a little crazy. So definitely thinking a lot about bikes and getting back out there and riding and stuff. So I'm pretty excited about that. Hopefully, the spring will be sudden, and mid late March I'll be able to get the XSR out and get a ride in right away. But it depends on the year, and sometimes it goes into mid-April. So we're just gonna have to see how it goes. Um, so thank you for watching. I hope my leftover trip footage was cool, and I hope you have a great day or evening or night or whatever time you're watching this. And if you're also suffering through winter, well, keep getting. We're getting there. It's February. We're gonna survive. And if you live somewhere nice and warm all year, well, I hate you. So there you go. So peace.